Hello everyone, this is EB. Today I'm going to be going over everything that I watched the last year. I have a guest with me.
My name is Mitchell Holton. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So I did something similar to this last year, and I enjoyed that, so I decided to do something similar again this year, basically going over all the movies and shows that I watched in the previous years and putting them in a tier list, giving my opinions on all of them.
I don't think I've probably not seen all of them, so I'm going to probably be doing a little bit of Googling if I haven't seen them before, but...
Yeah. I don't have anything else to say, so I'm just going to get right into it. I'm going to be going in the order of which I watched everything, chronologically.
I think this is actually what we did last time. I remember now, because I could see you put the tier list together. That definitely makes sense.
Also, something that I did differently from last year, I actually took notes on everything that I watched.
Oh, nice.
So if you hear me flipping through a notebook, that's what that is. The first thing I remember watching this year was Steven Universe. In my notes, I put it in the A+ category, so I'm going to put it there. Have you ever seen Steven Universe at all?
No, I've got... So I work in video game development. I have a lot of artist friends in video game development, and a lot of them really liked the show. I have not seen it, but I've been told it's very good.
Yeah. It came out, I think it came out on Cartoon Network around 10 years ago, and I remember watching the show when it was coming out. I don't think I watched every single episode while they were airing, but I kept up with most of it. I remember watching videos about it on YouTube recently, and that kind of made me interested in watching the series again, so at the start of the year, I binge watched the whole thing start to finish, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I wouldn't say, like, I'm the biggest fan of the show, but I still thought it was really good. Like, I think it's very common for artists to like the show, because it does have a very unique art style that a lot of people like. I remember liking about the show is that it kind of started off pretty simple and straightforward with the story, but the more the series progressed, it introduced a lot more lore elements, and it got more complex with the story.
How would you compare it to, like, Adventure Time and Gravity Falls? Because those are kind of the same era, same network.
Adventure Time, I don't remember as much, because I haven't seen it in a long time. Gravity Falls, I would say that Steven Universe is around as the same tier as Gravity Falls. Personally, I think I prefer Gravity Falls more, but that's not to undermine Steven Universe. I still think it's pretty good. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say about that. The next thing on my list is The Suicide Squad. Not to be confused for the 2016 movie. This is the movie that came out in 2021. I think I also put this up in the A+ category. I think that this was written and directed by the same guy who did the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, and there is like a very similar tone with this one, where like it's a comedy and it tells a lot of jokes, but also has like a lot of dramatic and emotional moments in it too. And I think that's the thing that James Gunn, the director, is like known for doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've seen this one.
Yeah,
it's got pretty good reviews on Rotten Tomatoes and stuff. Yeah, I remember liking it too. It's interesting that it's by the same guys as you said, because it's nothing like those movies. They're very different.
Yeah. I think this movie kind of goes more with like the gore and violence than Guardians of the Galaxy does, obviously.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
Yeah, like one of the benefits of like having an R rating. One criticism I remember having about the movie is that I felt at some times it did feel like that they did a thing where they would stop the story so that a character could give their backstory. And that's not like enough to ruin the movie by any means, but it is like something that I noticed that did happen quite a few times.
Are you saying that because you already knew the backstory and it was not something you needed introduced to, or was it just tedious, I guess?
I guess it's more of a issue of it being kind of tedious, I would say.
Okay, that makes sense.
That's really the only criticism I have of it. I think overall it's still a really good movie. Next on my list is Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And I have to say this right now, I did not finish the entire show because they only have I watched it on Netflix, and they only have the first 4 seasons on Netflix, and there are 8 total. I did watch season 5 on YouTube, but it's really expensive to get all the seasons on there, so I haven't finished the show yet. So I only watched the first 5 seasons, so I'm only basing this off of, like, the first half of the show.
A tier?
Yeah, it's going into A tier. I enjoyed it quite a bit. I thought it was pretty funny. I think this show starts off alright, but I think that the writing quality does improve a bit as the series continues. I think the characters are pretty entertaining. One thing I remember not liking about the show as much is that sometimes, because like it is kind of like a cop show, and sometimes like you have characters like working on like solving different crimes. The issue with that is that sometimes they I felt that the resolutions to them were not very satisfying, because sometimes like characters would figure stuff out off screen, and it kind of felt a little cheap.
Interesting, because it is more of a comedy, right? I mean, I haven't seen it really myself, but I've seen like clips of it. So that is interesting, because it's more like it's a kind of a comedy compared to a real like drama kind of TV show.
Yeah, it does have some dramatic moments, and that's another thing about the show that I remember kind of taking issue with. Is sometimes the dramatic moments I think would work well, but I think there were other times when they didn't quite stick the landing, because I think it kind of created this tonal issue where they would go back and forth between, and sometimes like they would talk about like real world issues that would happen. I think there's this one episode where like there's a mass shooting going on, and that episode like it jumps back and forth between talking about like this real world thing that happens, then it jumps and like taking it seriously, and then like it will jump to like more comedic bits, and it did kind of feel tonally confused because of that sometimes.
Sure.
But overall, like, I still enjoyed the show a lot. I would like to be able to finish the rest of it, but I'm not so emotionally invested to it where like I feel like I'm losing any sleep by not being able to finish it.
Yeah, I get that.
Next is Pacific Rim. Oops, I don't want to go down. I want to go up in the A category.
Which one was this? There's been a couple.
I think it's the first one.
First
I haven't
one?
seen. Yeah, I haven't seen the sequel. I enjoyed this quite a bit. I think it's one of those movies where it's less like it's not really one of those movies you go into like for the story, for the characters, or to like explore a deeper theme of some kind. But that's not really a problem, because that's not the kind of movie it was made to be. It's like it's a fun action movie, and I think it does really well at that. I think that the fights between the Jaegers and the Kaijus are really well done. Like the choreography is great. The sense of scale in the movie is also great. Like the mechs and the aliens feel absolutely they feel massive in the movie. I think that's something they did really well with it. And I think that even though the story isn't the main focus, like there's still enough there that you can get invested into it.
Yeah, I remember watching this too. I mean, that's the same criticism everyone has with movies, like, oh, the story's not as good as it should be or whatever, but like, yeah, I agree with what you said. That's not the point of the movie. The point of the movie is big mechs punching big aliens, so I think obviously it lived up to that very well. And it was made in 2013, so it was like, for its time, it was really cool. Like, that was the first, I guess, as far as I can remember, that was like one of the first like crazy big movies, you know, like visually like that.
Next on my list, we got Transformers Animated, which is another A+ category. So far, the rankings for these are pretty good. I remember... So a little bit of backstory on this. I remember when the first live-action Transformers movie came out back in 2007, like that's the thing that introduced me to the concept of Transformers. And I think Transformers Animated was the first Transformers TV show that I ever watched, and I decided to revisit it this year, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. I think one thing I liked about Transformers Animated is that it changed a few aspects of Transformers lore, and it kind of did something new. It kind of did something different with some of the characters. And I think that a lot of the changes to it, I think, are part of what I like about it, because like it kind of feels like a fresh, new take on Transformers lore with some of the changes that they make to it.
Cool. I've never seen it, but I'm looking at images of it right now. There's a character named Bulkhead that looks that looks sweet.
Yeah, Bulkhead. I think Bulkhead was made for this show. I'm not entirely sure about that, but Bulkhead I like a lot.
He looks just... What type of vehicle is he? He just looks like...
I think he's like a SWAT vehicle.
Oh, interesting.
I think I might be remembering incorrectly, but I think he's voiced by the same voice actor who is like Patrick Star in SpongeBob.
Oh, really? Does he sound like Patrick, or does he sound very different?
I think I think they kind of have like I think they sound similar. It might be the voice actor, but I'm not too confident about that.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. Overall, I think Transformers Animated. I haven't seen that many Transformers shows. I've only seen 2 of them. But I really like the ones that I have seen. Transformers Animated, I think, is pretty cool.
Cool.
Next, we have Speed Racer, which is another A tier. I think that this is based off of an anime that came out in, I think, the 60s. I've never seen it, probably never will, to be honest.
Was this a movie or was this a TV show?
This is a movie. I remember watching this when I was a kid, and there's a lot about it that I forgot. The weird thing about the movie is that it has a very unique visual style. And truth be told, I can kind of understand the visual style not working for everyone, because it is very different from what you would normally see in a movie. I can understand it being off-putting for some people, and when I was watching the movie, I kind of found it off-putting first too. I was like, "Whoa, what is this?" But I continued watching it. I got used to it. It's like, okay, I can. Once you get used to it, I think you can vibe with it. But like, it is, for some people, there might be that curb, like getting over just how weird the visual style of the movie is.
So, what was so weird about the visual style?
This might be kind of a mean comparison, but it did remind me a bit of like Shark Boy and Lava Girl, with how there's like so many CG elements incorporated into it. It was off-putting at first, but like, once you get used to it, like, there is a bit of a charm in the style. I did really like the story of the movie, like, especially there's a plot twist that obviously I can't spoil, but like I think that's my favorite part of the whole thing. Like, the way that they execute that was just absolutely perfect. I don't think I have much more to say on that. Next is Ben 10. I did not put a ranking for this in my notes. I think I forgot to do that, but I think I might put that in the A category too.
Ben 10, the TV show?
Yeah. I remember being really into Ben 10 when I was a kid, and I was kind of curious to like rewatch the show to see if it still held up. And I was kind of worried that it wouldn't, because that's something that happens sometimes when you rewatch something that you enjoyed as a kid, and you're like, oh, this actually kind of sucks. But luckily Ben 10 wasn't that. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Like, the premise behind the show is really creative. Do you know what the idea behind Ben 10 is?
Yeah, it's been a long time, but I do remember he's got a watch that he switches to, and he transforms into the... Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah. I think I
remember liking it a lot. That was one of my favorite shows, definitely.
Yeah. I think that the premise of the show is really creative, and I love a lot of the different aliens that they have throughout the series. And I think that's kind of like one of the things that makes a show appealing to a lot of people is that everyone has like a different favorite alien. I think that's like a really fun conversation to have.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like a Pokemon. I mean, because that kind of came out when Pokemon was. I guess maybe, I don't know if that was line up, but it is the same thing where it's like everyone's got their own characters that they like, and especially for, when we were younger, like that fantasy you're selling the kids is like, this world with all this stuff. I mean, that was, I remember loving that show.
I remember one thing I was kind of worried about is that I was kind of worried about Ben being an unlikable character, because I remember in the show, like, that's kind of like he sometimes was a little immature. And I was worried, like, thinking, like, if going back and watching the show again, I was like, am I gonna have to deal with Ben being annoying? And sometimes, he is a little annoying and unlikable, but, like, it wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be, thankfully. Like, he does have some growth as a character, and he does have some more mature moments where he does have, like, a good moral compass, at least, that I think kind of balances out the immaturity of it a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Next on my list is Godzilla -1, which is the highest ranking so far, all the way up in the S tier. Yeah. Last year, I think I watched 2 Godzilla movies. I watched the original, and then I watched the most recent Japanese Godzilla movie at the time. And by coincidence, I think right after I watched those movies, like, there's a trailer that dropped for another Godzilla movie that was going to come out, and honestly, so I'm not the biggest Godzilla fan on the planet. I think I've only seen a handful of movies. Like, I've seen a few of the Japanese ones, I've seen a few of the American ones. But of the Godzilla movies that I have seen, -1 is my favorite out of them so far. And it is possible that if I watched more Godzilla movies that I would find one that I like more than -1, but I think for the time being, -1 I think stands at the top of all of them.
So which one is -1? Is that a new one, or is that one of the older ones?
Yeah, it came out last year. I think it's like the most recent Japanese Godzilla movie.
Oh, and so this is a Japanese movie. Okay.
Yeah, I think -1 is like, I think that even if you're not a Godzilla fan, you could probably enjoy it. I think the movie, like, it takes place in Japan right after World War II ends. And the movie follows, I can't remember the character's name, but I think he was a kamikaze pilot. But he lied about his plane malfunctioning so that he could get out of it. And there's a lot of guilt and shame that he feels around that. Because, like, in World War II, I think Japan was, like, very big on, like, not surrendering, and, like, there's, like, if that was, like, something, if you were a failed kamikaze pilot, like, there would have been, like, a lot of shame around that. Like, it is kind of like a commentary. A part of the movie is, like, is a commentary on how callous Japan was with, like, the lives of, like, a lot of soldiers during World War II. I think the movie also kind of, like, explores, like, the survivor's guilt that the character feels. And I think, like, that's one thing that Godzilla movies usually struggle with, is, like, the human characters usually just are not very interesting.
Yeah.
That's not the issue with, like, -1 does not have that issue. Like, the human characters in this movie, like, are great. They're arguably, like, the best part of it. Although, what they do with Godzilla is also great. Like, Godzilla in this movie, I think, is absolutely terrifying. Like, for one, the CGI effects on him are amazing. Like, they really hit out of the park with that, and the design is great. He really feels like this force of nature, and I think they did him really well in this movie.
Cool. I'll have to look into this. Is it in Japanese, or is it in English?
I think I think they have both on Netflix, the English version
Cool.
and the Japanese version. So for the next, I think I'm going to do a 2-in-1 entry because these are two different shows, but they're made by the same creative team and they are in the same continuity. The first one is Batman the Animated Series, and the next one is Batman Beyond. The animated series, I'm also going to put this up into the S tier. Have you seen the animated series?
I have not. S tier though. That's pretty.
I think.
Maybe I will.
Yeah. I think. Yeah, it came out. I think they have it on Max. That's how I watch the whole show. Is on there. I think this show came out in the 90s, and to a lot of people say that like the animated series is like the definitive take on Batman, and I'm inclined to agree. I think that I'm a big Batman fan, and honestly I think that the animated series is probably one of the best takes on the character ever. I think
cool.
that there's so many great stories that they tell with the characters. Like there's so many interesting things. You know the character Harley Quinn, right?
Yes.
She was invented for this show, and she ended up becoming so popular that she became a regular part of like Batman comics.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
I did not know that.
I think that this is the show where they also got Kevin Conroy to voice Batman, who to a lot of people is like the definitive voice of Batman, and has like spent the rest of his life voice acting for the character. Like he gives an absolutely phenomenal performance as Batman. I think the show also just has like this tragic element to it. One of my favorite things that they do with the show is like they make a lot of the villains in the series these tragic characters, you kind of sometimes can't help but feel bad for them. I don't know if you're familiar at all with Mr. Freeze and his backstory.
No, I don't know much about any of these.
Yeah, I think that the common backstory for Mr. Freeze is that he was a normal guy and he had a wife who was dying from a disease, so he froze her in ice so that she could keep her alive while he tried to find a cure. But his boss ended up like sabotaging it, and he was inflicted with a condition where he can't survive unless like he was in sub-zero temperatures. And Mr. Freeze like ended up wanting to get revenge against that guy for hurting him and basically killing his wife. And this show like invented that backstory, and people loved it so much that it's basically like the default backstory for Mr. Freeze now. And like that's another thing that this show did, is like it's such a big landmark in Batman media. It's like there's a good reason why this is considered like the definitive take on Batman.
That's really cool. I did not know any of this.
As for the next show, Batman Beyond, it's not as good, but I'm still going to put it in the A+ category. I think what happened with Batman Beyond is that the executives told the creative team that they wanted, like, oh, we want to appeal to a younger demographic, so we want you to make Batman a teenager. And at first they didn't like that idea, but they thought about it more and they realized, like, they could actually make that work. So they came up with this idea where Bruce Wayne is an old man. He's too old to be Batman. So instead, this high school kid named Terry McGinnis becomes Batman and does the crime fighting while Bruce Wayne kind of works behind the scenes and mentors him. And I really love the premise of the show, because like it's the idea of like the Batman legacy being carried on by someone else. There's like a futuristic setting in Batman Beyond that's really creative, and they create all these new villains for this show. Like they could have so easily just taken the normal Batman villains and made them old, but they don't really do that. Most of the villains are like new creations for the show, and I think it's a really cool addition to Batman lore.
Nice. What made it a little bit worse than the S tier Batman?
It's not that there's anything worse about it. It's just that the animated series, I think, is like, it's such a lightning in a bottle show where like there's just like the right people in the right place at the right time. It kind of came together that just made it what it is. That realistically, like, you're probably never gonna get something as good as it, even if it is the same people working on it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's less that there's anything wrong with it's less that there's anything wrong with Batman Beyond, and more that like the animated series is just so good that realistically you can never get anything that's on the same level as it. Next on my list is Deadpool and Wolverine. And
I have seen this.
This ranking might upset some people, but I think I might put it in B, to be honest.
I think that's fair.
I think this movie was made because, like, I think the movie is kind of like it's about like a lot of the Fox Marvel movies that have came out, and I haven't really seen those. So I think because of the fact, it's probably the reason why I don't like the movie more. Like, if I was more invested in that universe and in those characters, like, the movie I would probably rank it higher, but because I'm not as invested in it, I think that B is the highest I can go with it, honestly.
Yeah, it was making fun of the stuff that Marvel's been doing with like all of the alternate universes and stuff. But I think for the same reason a lot of that stuff didn't work, I felt like this movie I don't know. I think everyone's so tired of that stuff. And it was funny to hear it get made fun of in Deadpool, but I don't know.
Yeah.
There's just so much of like... I think it would be crazy to say it was as good as the first two, you know?
Yeah. I've seen the second Deadpool. I liked it a bit. The first one I haven't seen yet. I might get around to it someday.
I think the first one
I can understand, like...
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I was just going to say, I think the first one's probably my favorite. But, I think you also might like it a little bit more because it's a bit more standalone, and it doesn't have much... It doesn't do the references that the latest Deadpool movie did. I mean, there's a couple references, but it's mainly its own product. There's not too much going on with, like, mixed IPs.
Yeah, that makes sense. The next one on the list, it's gonna get a little more serious. The movie is Downfall. Are you familiar with this movie at all?
I'm not.
Do you know the internet meme where it's a clip from a movie where Hitler is in a bunker and he goes on an angry rant?
I do.
This movie is where that meme is from.
Interesting.
Yeah. The movie, it takes place in the bunker that Hitler was in, like, in the last days of World War II. And it's basically, as the title implies, like, it is showing, like, the downfall of Germany at the end of that war. I think it, like, the movie, like, is, like, a big... I think, obviously, like, the biggest thing about it is, like, it is a criticism of, like, of Hitler and Nazi Germany, like, the fanaticism of it, and how... I think, like, one of the themes in the movie is, like, how so many people kind of, like, deify Hitler and, like, treat him like a god, but when in reality, he was just a person, and, like, the conflict of, like, the deification that people have of him. I think that that's one of the message that the movie is going for, like, how deifying people like Hitler, like, the damage that comes from that, how it really does more harm than good in the long run.
Interesting. Where did you put this one? A tier?
Yeah. And I think it is kind of weird to put it in A tier next to things like Ben 10 and Speed Racer. I realize that, but trying truth be told, like, I think it is a good movie. It's not usually the kind of thing that I'm into. I think every now and then it's good to step outside your comfort zone and try something new.
Yeah, I like a lot of these historical movies. Is it more of like a doc? It's not a documentary, is it? It's like its own standalone movie, right?
No, I think it is a drama. I'm kind of interested to see how historically accurate the movie is, because like obviously like there's obviously going to be changes from like the real world events and like the movie that's made about it.
Cool. Google says generally considered to be historically accurate, but I guess I don't know what that entirely means.
Yeah. I remember reading somewhere that when the movie came out, there's a lot of controversy around it. A lot of people said they didn't like how the movie humanizes Hitler. And it is true that the movie does humanize Hitler, but the thing is, there's a difference between humanizing someone and condoning someone. I think, because like the movie does not portray Hitler in a positive light. Like he is very narcissistic and apathetic in the movie. Like he throws like a random tantrum anytime like the little like over like the tiniest things. Like whenever something doesn't go the way he wants it to. It's like the movie is not very nice to Hitler. Like it makes no qualms about the fact that he was a monster. But I think like people have said like there is an importance to humanizing people like Hitler, because like the dark truth is like that's the thing that people do sometimes. Like humans can be capable of doing evil things, and we have to acknowledge that.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes sense.
I think I'm gonna do another 2-in-1 for the next entry. I think this does kind of defuse the conversation from like the heaviness of the last movie. Beetlejuice and the sequel Beetlejuice. I'll put both of these in the A category. Have you seen?
I haven't seen either. No. I kind of know the IP, but I really don't know much about it.
I think Beetlejuice is like it's a Tim Burton movie. It came out in the 80s. It's pretty good. It's pretty funny. It is very iconic. I think that Michael Keaton, he gives a really good performance as Beetlejuice. Like the amount of energy that he puts into it, like and Beetlejuice I thought also is like a really gross character, but I mean that as a compliment. Like he's designed to be gross, and I think a lot of the comedy comes from just like this really obscene, disgusting character, and like the other characters' reactions to it.
Interesting. Yeah, this is.
Yeah.
I'm not a big. I wasn't into horror movies when I was a kid, and I think I probably just assigned this to the list of like never gonna see because I probably thought it was horror when I was a kid. Is it like goofy, or is it like what is the genre?
I think
of the
it's
movie?
more. I think it's horror comedy. I think it's more. There are some more. I don't know if I would describe them as scary, but there are some more intense moments of the movie. But like they are done in a comedic sense. So I feel like that it's nothing that would really, I think, disturb or scare you more than like it would probably just make you laugh.
Sure.
I think the sequel kind of does a bit more of that. I think I liked the first movie more, but the second movie had its moments. I think one problem that the second movie had is like there's too much going on. Like there's a lot of subplots in the second movie. There's one subplot in particular that I think they should have cut because like it didn't really change that much about the story and it didn't really go anywhere. So like they probably should have just cut it out entirely. But other than that, I think it was still pretty enjoyable.
Good. Interesting. Sorry, we're talking about the old one, right? Or both? We're talking about both of them? Both the new and the old one?
I was talking about the second one.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, I think it's the second one. I think the first one's a lot more focused story-wise. The second one, I think like it kind of overdid itself, like all the subplots. Like that's I think the only real problem they have with the second movie. Next on my list, I think these next three movies are stuff that I watched in October because, you know, the Halloween season. The first is Alien. I think this is a classic and iconic horror movie. I remember watching a bit of this on TV like 10 years ago and being really invested in it. I think this is the first time like I sat down and watched the whole thing start to finish. I liked it quite a bit, but I think it's like one of those movies I have to be in the right mood for because it is like a lot more slower paced. And I think for me personally, like my default is like I kind of prefer more fast paced stuff. So like for a more slower paced movie, I think I need to be in the right mindset for that. But I think that it's a really good, it's a great horror movie. Like I think the setting in space kind of helps with that because like it's probably the most isolated place you could ever be because like if you're stuck in space, like really there's no one else nearby that could help you. Like the nearest planet could be like millions of miles away. So I think the isolation of that helps with the horror. I think the monster in the movie is also really well done. The design of it is really unique, and they kind of also do this really clever thing where like they always have it hiding in the shadows and you don't really get a good look at it first, and it makes it a lot more scarier.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I've never seen it, but I mean, this is a really well reviewed movie. Like this is, this is considered like a critically acclaimed movie, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is like considered like one of the best horror movies ever made.
Yeah, I've never been too into horror movies, so I haven't seen it. But
speaking of another iconic horror movie, Psycho, which I think I'll go and put in the same category. I remember seeing this years ago. I think there was like a thing at Alamo Drafthouse where they're like showing a classic horror movie every week, and I think I went to go see it with my dad. And it's pretty good. I think it came out in the 60s. I think sometimes like movies from that far back, sometimes they have a tendency to not age very well, but I think this movie has aged pretty well for the most part. Like there's probably a few things here and there about it that might not hold up the best, but I think in general, I think most of the movie still holds up pretty well.
It looks like Psycho is on Netflix. And yeah, it was released in 1960. Wow, that's a long time ago.
Yeah, I think that the movie was filmed in black and white, and I think they did have color movies at the time, and I think the director of the movie did make movies in color before, but I think that the movie works better in black and white. I think it helps set the tone a lot better than it would if it was in color. I think there's kind of something about a lot of old black and white movies where the lack of color kind of helps set the tone a bit more.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Do you know that there's that iconic movie scene where like there's someone who's like taking a shower and like someone like stabs them?
Yeah, I think
creepy
so.
Music is playing.
Yeah,
it comes from this movie.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at pictures right now, so I do see that.
Yeah, I think the main theme for this movie is like very iconic. The shower scene is also very iconic. It's another like classic and iconic horror movie that has like stood the test of time.
Cool, interesting. It's just about a serial killer, I guess, just to avoid spoilers, but that's kind of what the vibe I'm getting.
I guess you could say that. I think there's a bit more to it than that, but in general, I think that you could describe it as that. A more recent movie, though this still did come out a while ago, Cloverfield.
Cloverfield? I have not seen Cloverfield.
I think that the director of it is Matt Reeves, who also did the most recent live-action Batman movie.
Interesting.
Do you know what the general premise of Cloverfield is?
I don't.
It's a found footage movie, It takes place in New York City, and basically what happens is that there are these people at a party, and a monster comes out of the ocean, like starts attacking the city.
Huh. What does it mean to be a found footage movie?
The idea is that, I think the idea is that it's meant to have the appearance that this is footage that someone else has found and compiled together. Like, I think that at the start of the movie, like, it starts at the screen saying, like, this footage is like the property of the U.S. military, with like the implication that the military found the camera it was recorded on and like used as like a piece of evidence for like the monster attack. I think that found footage kind of gets like a lot of slack from some people, but I think this movie makes the found footage gimmick of it work really well. I think I remember hearing somewhere that the director of the movie said that it was meant to be a metaphor for 9/11. And that is like very apparent in it, because like the whole found footage aspect, because like there was a lot of people who recorded what was happening on 9/11 with like their own cameras. And I think that you would kind of, if you did make this more of a conventional movie, like, it would technically work, but I don't think that the metaphor would work as well.
I wonder if it's cheaper to make too, because you could just use, I mean, if you're simulating that it's recorded with a phone, you could probably just record it with a phone.
Yeah, I think that is one of the benefits of like doing found footage. Like, I've seen some people complain like, oh, the camera's so shaky, it's so chaotic, you don't really get a good look at the monster. But I think all of that is like intentional, because like if you have a giant monster attacking a city, it is going to be chaotic.
Yeah.
And I think that not getting a good look at the monster, it's a very common thing they do in horror movies. Like, they kind of hide the monster at first, like build up a mystique around it to make it creepier. And I think it works really well in this movie.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
I think Cloverfield's pretty good. Not a masterpiece, but I think it did what it was going for pretty well. I think I'm gonna do another 2-in-1 for the next entry. Last year, I remember I talked about the series Little Witch Academia, and there are 2 movies that were made for it, and I watched those this year. The first one, which I think came out in 2013, and they did a sequel 2 years later called Enchanted Parade. I think I'll put them both in A+. I enjoyed both these movies quite a bit. Like, the first one especially kind of feels like a pilot episode of sorts, where like it introduces the basic concept and introduces the characters, but also like leaves the door open like to flesh them out later down the line. And the sequel like does feel like it kind of does, like, it feels like it's doing that. Like, now we introduce the characters, we introduce the premise, now we're just gonna like flesh it out and do something more with it.
Interesting. So they're in the same timeline as the TV show?
I think the TV show resets the continuity. Because, like, the first 2 movies, and the show, they do have the same characters and they do have the same premise. But when they did the show, they kind of, like, started over. I think it's probably because it was easier to do that, because a lot of people watching the show probably wouldn't have seen the first 2 movies, so they probably just did that so everyone was on the same page.
Oh, I assumed the show came first and then the movies. The movies came first and then the show?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the movies came first.
I've never seen any of them.
A part of me kind of...
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
A part of me kind of wishes that the movies were canon to the show, because I did enjoy them quite a bit. It was kind of disappointing that they didn't make it into like the final continuity of the show they ended up making with it. I think I said this last year too when I talked about the shows, that I kind of felt disappointed that they didn't do more, like another season of it, because I felt like that they could do more with like the premise and the characters, and I kind of felt like there's a bit of lost potential there. But you know, I'll get what I can. Next on my list, the last horror movie, It Chapter 2. I'm not going to do Chapter 1 because I've already seen that a few years ago. Honestly, I remember the first movie enough to... If I were to rank the first movie, I think I'd put it in A+. The second movie I'd probably put in like an A. I don't think I liked it as much as the first one. How familiar are you with the story of It?
Not very. Kind of like I said earlier, horror movies aren't necessarily my thing, so I avoid that. But I know it's a clown, I guess, and I know he lives in the sewers, I guess, or something.
So I think that it started out as a book that's written by Stephen King.
Yeah.
And in the book, like, it goes back because, like, there's a lot of characters and they're dealing with Pennywise the clown. It goes back and forth between them as kids and them as adults. And for these movies, they split it up, where the first movie focuses on them as kids, and the second movie focuses on them as adults. And I think that with the first movie, I think they kind of did a better job at getting away with, like, splitting the timeline. But by the second movie, it starts to become a lot more obvious that the story wasn't originally intended with that going back and forth between them as kids and them as adults. Because I do think that with, like, it is fairly obvious with the second movie that they did kind of have to do some retooling to make the split work.
So the first movie isn't. So both movies have them as kids and them as adults. Like, it's.
I think the
or
first
is one movie them as the kids and then the second movie is them as adults?
I think the first movie is them just as kids. The second movie is mostly them as adults, but occasionally there are flashbacks to when they were kids.
Oh, I see what you're saying now. Okay, yeah.
Yeah. I think, honestly, I feel like that I enjoyed it a lot more with the first movie. I think a part of it is because of the fact that they were kids, and I think I'm struggling to find the words to describe it, but I think that the viewing it through the eyes of, like, through the eyes of, like, of kids, it kind of adds a sense of innocence to it, I suppose. And I think that one of the themes of the story is, like, growing up into adulthood, and I think that you kind of get that more with the first movie. Like, you're basically starting off with these kids who are, like, dealing with something they don't understand, and, like, how they are basically being forced to mature to be able to deal with it. With the second movie, I don't think you get that as much, because by that time they already are adults, so it doesn't feel like that they have to do that character development as much as they did with the first movie.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I think another issue that I had with the movie too is, like, there's some comedic moments in it. I think the first movie had some comedic moments in it too, but I think it did a better job at balancing them out. The second movie, it was a lot more hit or miss. There were some jokes that worked, there were some that didn't, and it felt a lot more imbalanced than it did in the first movie. But overall, I still liked it quite a bit. I think that it was a good follow-up. I did find the ending to be pretty satisfying. I think that what they did with Pennywise, I think they did a good job at making him scary. I enjoyed it, but it did have its faults. And now for the last one on the list, Transformers 1, which is going up to the A+ tier.
Transformers 1. Is this movie or TV show?
It is a movie. I think it's the most recent Transformers movie. I remember watching the trailer for this a few months ago, and I did not like the trailer. I thought, like, the animation and art style I thought looked great, but the attempts at comedy in the trailer are the thing that I didn't really like as much. And so I was kind of hesitant about watching the movie when I first saw the trailer. I was like, I don't know, the trailer just didn't really convince me. But when the movie came out, like, I heard a lot of buzz around it. People were talking about how good it was. So I decided to give it a chance, and when I watched it, it did actually turn out to be pretty damn good. And I think that it is kind of unfortunate that the promotional material for the movie didn't really... I think that the movie could have had better promotional material. I don't think that really did the movie justice.
Interesting. And this came out just recently then, huh?
Yeah. So, like, Transformers 1, I think it goes into the origin story of Optimus Prime and Megatron. And they're not even Optimus Prime and Megatron yet. They are Orion Pax and D16 respectively. And I think that there are some Transformers stories that do go into the origins of those characters, but that's not like a big mainstream thing from Transformers franchise. So I was kind of surprised to see that they were adapting like the origin story, because that's not something that I would expect that they would do. But I think they did a pretty good job with it. Like, as a Transformers fan, I kind of have been disappointed with a lot of the movies that they've been putting out, because a lot of them were either just kind of average or just not very good. So it's very satisfying to get a Transformers movie that's actually really good for once.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah. I think that this is probably a much, because there's a lot of people who say like that their first exposure to Transformers was the Michael Bay movies, and how that kind of made them disinterested in the series. But I think that this does a much better job at like introducing people into Transformers. I think that this would probably get a lot of people into the series. I think the fact that it is an origin movie, I think, kind of helps with that, because like it does kind of give a starting off point for a lot of people, so they know like where the whole story began.
Yeah, that'd be nice. I should go and look and watch that.
What I like about the movie is that Optimus and Megatron, they start off as like they're best friends at the beginning, but like over the course of the story, like they end up becoming enemies. I think they did that whole story very well, and I think by the end of it, like there is that bittersweetness of like these guys who are like once were like really close friends are now bitter enemies. And I think the tragedy of that is, I think they did that really well in the movie.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I didn't know. I mean, I seen the movies, the Michael Bay movies with Megatron, and I never even. I don't think that was part of the story at all. I mean, I don't remember that at all.
I think they hinted at it in one of the movies, but they didn't really go into it. One thing that I did like about the movie, because like there's a lot of bits of like fan service in it, but it didn't like go overboard with it. It felt like it was done in a way like, if you're a fan, you know what they're referencing, but even if you're not, you can still follow along and not be confused at all.
Yeah, not feel like you're left out.
I think like this is one of those movies where like, because there were a lot of like franchise movies where if you're not a fan of it, you're probably not going to be able to enjoy it, because like you're not going to be able to follow along, and there's probably some context that's lost. But I don't think that's the case with Transformers 1. I think that you could enjoy it even if you're not a big Transformers fan, because I think it works as like a standalone story that works without having to rely on like pre-existing context.
Yeah, that's nice.
And we're done. That is everything that I have watched over the year.
Nice. Thanks for having me, EB. That was fun.
Yeah.